Greetings to the listeners and the viewers. I thank you for tuning into our podcast, Whispers of Hope podcast. Today, I would like to share with you my spiritual journey. In the earlier video or podcast, I had mentioned that I have identified a common thread within the four institutions where I've been involved, which is the area of vetting, where I was working as an intelligence officer for National Intelligence Agency. I've trained also as a Sangoma. I've trained as a spiritual healer. I've been in the New Age movement. I also received training there in aromatherapy and Reiki. I also been in the charismatic church movement. So in all these institutions, I had identified a common thread. So for you, the listener, the viewer, to understand, let me briefly share with you my spiritual journey. I come from a family that is known as Bathukwa Kaspedi. But initially we are Ndebele as we follow our history of our ancestry. Singabathungwa. That is our clan name. And I normally introduce myself with my personal praise name because we also have a clan name and a clan praise, which is Sereto. And there's also Sereto se personal. Sereto saka se personal ki Meladi. So when you say Meladi, you don't have to put in a prefix like Gugu or Mama Meladi, no, or Sesi Meladi. I am Meladi. In that way, you are honoring me in a way by using that praise name. So for the purpose of this podcast, I'm using the name, my praise name, Meladi. I'm clarifying this for the purpose of those who know me using my formal name that is written in my, what you call it, ID number, in my identification. I come from a clan because within a clan there are families. And within our clan, we have our ancestors who have declared themselves Christians. So I come from a family that is within the covenant of Christ, and we are known as Christians. When I was growing up, there are certain traditions and cultural practices that we never practice in my family, which are normally and generally known to be practiced in the African families. For an example, doing ancestral ceremonies in my family, that was foreign. It was not known and it was never explicitly explained why. But I later got to learn to understand that my forebearers, my great-great-great-grandfathers, from the 1800s, 1818 to be specific, my great-grandfather, Liswika Cornelius, entered into a covenant with the Almighty God to serve as a preacher, as an evangelist, and was trained in Lesotho. He moved from the northern province that is known today as Limpopo province, going to Kimberley, as it was the normal practice those days for people to go and work at the mines in Kimberley to go and get some diamonds for their livelihood. But when he got to Kimberley, he then met missionaries, French missionaries from Lesotho, who then recruited them to go for training, willingly so, to become evangelists. So my grandfather was not alone on that journey. He had other family members. It is written that the Mulepo people were there, Mulepo, Mpe, and Dikutla. And amongst the missionaries, I will remember the name of the missionary as I go along, that was also there, who appears in one of the hymn books that we use, the Filatasioni. So my grandfathers on my mother's side and my father's side, they entered into a covenant to be the followers of Christ. I would like to explain that there's a difference between a contract and a covenant. When you enter a covenant is sealed by blood. A contract can just be sealed by signing a paper, or you can also have a verbal contract. However, when we speak of a covenant, there's blood involved. So within the Christian belief, when you believe and accept Jesus Christ as the Lord, as your Lord and Savior, you then accept that the blood of Jesus redeems you from whatever wrongs that you are doing, whatever sin that you were born into, and you strive to do away with sin in your life. And yet, with a contract, there's a signature there, there's an agreement there, but within the covenant, you have to abide with the laws and the rules. The same way as when you get into a contract serving ancestors. There's also the shedding of the blood, and in that case is the blood of animals. From a chicken, goat, you can also use a cow. So in my lineage, we are born within this covenant. And we took that for granted, and it was not actually explained, me especially, maybe some of my cousins and my siblings, maybe they got that explanation. But I got to understand this later in life. As I go along, I will mention it again. So I am giving you uh, the background of where I come from. So as I was growing up, I became aware of the things that were happening in my environment. As a young student, I became an activist during 1976 when uh, we during 1976 as we what's the word, Ghana? I become emotional when I speak about this period because it has impacted on me emotionally and spiritually. Because that was the initial stage of me being confronted with blood when most of the students were being shot during the unrest. I was a teenager at that time. There was turmoil in my life trying to understand who I was as a person and also entering womanhood as I would experience a period of disruption of my daily routine when I got my period. Because some months I would be disorientated and not know which day it was or where I was, because especially when there was a full moon. In the mix of all this, I grew up with visions, having visions and visitations. There was a constant visitation of my father's younger brother who had died due to a car accident. When he died, he was on his way home, having gone to visit his newly born daughter. And when he visited me in my sleep, coming in a form of a vision, he was coming carrying a baby, and he would ask, why have my family forgotten about me? Why have they forsaken me? And at first, I did not know what to do with the information or how to handle it. But ultimately, I had to share it with my parents because as the visions intensified, I sometimes uh, lost consciousness, I fainted. And during that time, I would be communicating with a person that they could not see. And I was unconscious at the same time, but and still communicating. So that was a constant in my life, and my parents had to seek relief from that for me. The medical fraternity could not be of help because it was a spiritual occurrence rather than a medical um, problem. So my parents were then advised to consult with mediums who would maybe give light of how I should get help and relief from this constant embarrassment that I was facing. Um, I then grew up before as I was facing that challenge. It caused also disruptions for my schooling. However, the biggest disruption was when I was supposed to have to write my Form 3, which is now known as grade 10, which was at that time an external examination, like we have matric as an external examination. We had Form 3 as external examination, and also Form 5 or Standard 10, which is known as grade 12 as that we wrote as external examination from the Department of Education. So as students, 1976, I was doing grade 10, what is known as grade 10 now, which was Form 3 then. We were supposed to write external examinations. We could not write because of the disruptions of when we demonstrated against the usage of Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. So during that period, a lot of students died, and that was the first occurrence in my generation to be faced with death in that way. It was very violent, and it was very traumatic. So a lot of us experienced nightmares. Some of my peers also had nervous breakdowns. Some left the country just trying to run away from this heat of death and persecution from the army and the police. Some died in prison. People were thrown from the 11th or 15th floor of John Foster Square, and there was no accountability for those cruel deaths of people. And mind you, some of the people who died in that way used to be our classmates, used to be the people that we know we played with. It was a very traumatic period, like we had experienced recently when we had COVID. It reminded me of that period where you wake up and then the next thing, your neighbor is gone because they succumbed to the COVID a virus. At that time, we would wake up and your friend would be gone, maybe dead or gone to exile. And in some other instances, we were even scared to even ask when we didn't see a person around, because when you ask around, where is so and so, sometimes you would be on the suspect list that maybe you are waiting for the police or something. So it was a very traumatic period in my life as a person. And the spilling of blood also had a very, very negative and traumatic impact to me. I then grew up and ultimately attained my matric. After getting my matric, I went to study in Lesotho, at the University of Lesotho, whereby there was we received bursaries from the United Nations. I was studying a diploma in business studies, which I could not complete because at that time I was there 85, 86, when we were supposed to finish 87. Our brothers who were in exile in Lesotho, because I did not declare myself as a refugee, but we had South Africans who were students who had declared themselves as refugees. So I was also tempted to declare myself as a refugee, but I could not, because I knew that I had to deal with this problem, that whenever on a monthly basis, especially when there was full moon, I will go through these periods of disengagement or disorientation where I don't know what happened to me at some points. I had later learned to discover that I am not the only person who goes through that. A lot of young women experience that. And we are being affected by, as a people, by what also happens in the atmosphere, uh, like when the moon changes, when there's full moon or quarter moon or whatever. Even now, when there was an eclipse, um, I did feel that something in the. I then came back home and then enrolled at Vista University, where I completed my BA degree, majoring in psychology and education. And I later attained a diploma from Wits University Business School for Public Service Management certificate, and also a diploma in forensic psychophysiology from Atlanta, where I was studying to become a polygraph examiner. I worked for at that time when I went for training as a polygraph examiner. I was working for the National Intelligence Agency, working in the area of vetting, where we were doing vetting. I can say it's a lifestyle audit of people who are applying for positions in government or even in private sector, because we also doing vetting of companies. um, I was employed in that area, and I experienced uh, people who had high qualifications, but they could not get the positions that they applied for because of the discrepancies in their lifestyles. As we go along, you will understand why I'm explaining this. And then my work was then disrupted because I started also experiencing a very strange phenomenon of when I touched a computer, I would uh, I would experience static shock, and even telephones. So I started consulting with the doctors. They did tests, and a determination could not be made on how I could be treated with that. And a colleague of mine then advised me to go and consult with a Sangoma. And having consulted with a Sangoma, I was told that my problems center around my spiritual gift. And she explained to me that I need to go and undergo a training as a Sangoma so that I can be a healer, and that would appease my ancestors. That was a bit foreign to me because, as I had explained, that within my family and my clan, we did not have Sangomas. So I did not have a point of reference. And unknowing to me, along the lineage, there had been healers in my ancestry. But because of the Christian belief, they had entered into a new covenant whereby they are not practicing that, because that required to do ancestral ceremonies, and that were not going along with what is expected of a Christian. So, because I was so desperate, I did, I ended up succumbing to become a Sangoma, because it was also starting to affect my daughter. Because one time I was called at her school when she had lost consciousness, and when they checked her pulse and breathing, there was nothing. And when I walked into the room where she was placed. I called her name and then she jumped. She just woke up. And then from the school, instead of going home, we went straight to the Sangoma because I was so scared of experiencing a repeat of what I had of what happened to my daughter. And when we got to the Sangoma, she explained to me that if you don't accept this calling to become a healer, your child is going to die. So because of that, I then succumbed to undergoing the training. I trained and then I trained in Pretoria, and then I later also trained in Komatipoort in Mpumalanga. I practiced for 7 years. However, by the seventh year, I was not content. The things that I was promised, they did not happen. In actual fact, my lifestyle started to decline, and that got me very worried and concerned. And I started to consult other healers and sangomas. And when I consulted with the sangomas, they advised me that because I have now matured within the institution of being a sangoma, I need to go and harvest a placenta of a living woman. And then I asked, how do I get that? How do I get involved in that? They said, I can recruit a nurse working within the maternity, working within maternity ward, and then I can then bring that placenta that can be mixed with other mixtures and herbs, and then they will make a portion for me that will attract luck, attract more people coming to consult with me. And I said, I don't have a problem. I'm not desperate to have a lot of people coming to me. All I want is to have my life back, because my personality had also changed. I used to, at that time I was missing myself, because I grew up being a happy child, and I was now a very sad and anxious adult. And I knew something was not okay with me. I had a void within, and I wanted answers. And I was promised that if I could bring that placenta and something could be done for me, that portion can be done for me, I'll be successful, I'll be okay, and all that. And I realized that, it's unlawful to go and buy a human part and unknowing to the owner of the placenta, and then, in brief, that is witchcraft. And then it doesn't go well within my value systems. And I became so frustrated until I met this uh, older, matured healer who when he was divining using the bones, he then said to me, uh, I don't see your ancestors in this realm that you are in. Who initiated? What have you been initiated into? I said, no, I've been initiated to work and fulfill the calling that my ancestors wanted me to do and practice as a healer, and I'm doing that. And I said, no, you are actually carrying foreign spirits with you. By the way, when I was being initiated, I was being initiated with the spirit of the Banguni and the spirit of Mandao. With the spirit of Mandao, you divine by transformation, by which means me as the healer, I transform by using herbs and certain enchanting, and transform, and I become another personality. For an example, if a person has come to me wanting to know about one of the deceased members of his or her family, I then transform and take the personality of that person. And then I then speak in that person's voice, and the gestures are of that person. So and then that used to bring some kind of comfort and satisfaction to the person who has come to consult with me. So the spirit of the Mandao empowers a person to transform and bring messages from people who have passed on. And similarly, also in the with the Banguni spirit, through divination, you are able to connect with the ancestors of people who have passed on, and be able to divine and tell the client what their problems are according to his or her ancestors. So this older man that I have consulted with then explained to me that you are actually practicing within the realm that is foreign from your ancestors, because your ancestors, I can see them praying. They are prayerful people. They have entered into a covenant of being Christians. They have removed themselves from practicing ancestral worship a long time ago. Yes, there have been diviners in your lineage, but they have uh, cut ties with ancestral worship. So what you need to do, then I asked him, how do I then restore myself into being what I'm supposed to be? And then the advice was that I should go and seek help within the churches that are spiritual, in terms of being prophetic. Uh, and then I said, which one? And then he said, no, you have to go back to home and start praying. God will show you. Well, ultimately, I managed to be in a ministry that helped me. I went through a process of prayers that helped me to heal some of the things that were bothering me because at that point I was also, drinking and smoking. I was a heavy smoker, and I was it was all, something that was, how can I explain it? When I grew up, I really could not tolerate people who were drinking and smoking. And now I was one of those people. That's where the aspect of also missing the real me came in. But this life that I'm leading now, it's not actually me. I want to be me. I missed me. So that ministry helped me to recover some of myself, because I then started developing a relationship with God. Because when I was growing up, to be honest, I took it for granted that uh, 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 my father is a minister of religion. My mother is a teacher. We grow up within the environment of prayer. I grew up in the church. So I took it for granted. Not realizing that it is important for me to build my own relationship with God. So that ministry helped me a great deal to build a relationship with God. And that is where I was initiated to become a spiritual healer. I then, at the during the 8th year of being in that ministry, there were some disruptions where I could not, you know, attend services as regularly as I would like to. And I started to pray about it, and uh, God answered me and showed me that I should not be in that ministry. My time in that ministry was actually expired. I should move on. And I was disillusioned because I used to love that ministry and I had gotten some kind of relief in that ministry. And it has also given me the direction of, connecting with building a relationship with God. However, it was later revealed to me that the ministry was also built and the foundation was on ancestral worship initially, although later on it advanced to to doing away with ancestral worship. But for me, it was not a place where I'm supposed to spend the rest of my life being in that ministry. So I was disillusioned because I was striving also on the fellowship that I was getting in that ministry. Now I found myself um having to look for a place where I should go for fellowship. And then I relocated from Gauteng. I came back to Limpopo. Coming back here, I was invited into um, I was invited to 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 the Born Again Church. Kataganyane tupa pele pele. O tla kgona go e edita mosimo. Let me go back a little bit. I grew up within the Reformed Church, the Dutch Reformed Church, and when I was practicing as a Sangoma, I had completely stopped going to church, but I had not stopped praying. So the aspect of fellowship was non existent in my life. Uh, my life centered around as ancestral worship and ancestral ceremonies. And then I then seeking clarity and more help about restoring what I'm all about and searching for my prayerful gift. I then went into the apostolic uh, church, which was based on African traditional, or known also as African traditional churches, if I could put it that way. That's where I spent 8 years. And then I then was invited when I moved from Gauteng coming back to Limpopo, I had no place of fellowship. And then I was invited into the charismatic church. And I experienced the reformed way of prayer, and then the African traditional, and then also the charismatic, and had experience within the charismatic church. That is when later I then discovered the common thread that was running through all these institutions that I had been in spiritually. The common thread that I have mentioned in the previous podcast, that I need to share it with you listeners. My training as a faith healer, it was within the Apostolic Church that falls within the independent African churches. It's those churches that are being owned by families or an individual who starts his own or her own church, and then it is then led from generation to generation by strictly family members. And then coming back from Gauteng to Limpopo, I was invited at a charismatic church, and then I attended two of those charismatic churches locally. I would like to remind the listener and the viewer that I had mentioned that I have identified a common thread that was running, that I had identified when I was working within the area of vetting, which is lifestyle audit, if I could put it that way, just for the sake of better understanding or quicker understanding for those who don't understand what vetting is all about. And my experience within the area of being and practicing as a Sangoma and a faith healer, and also in the New Age movement, where I had trained as a Reiki practitioner, and ultimately I found myself in the charismatic movement. So there is a common thread running there, which I am going to be explaining in the next episode. The purpose of this episode today, giving you a snippet of my background, is that when I then unpack and explain the common thread, the listener and the viewer should have had this background information about who I am and what I'm all about. What I forgot to mention was that I was brought up within the Dutch Reformed Church environment or background. So for today, I'd like to thank you, the listener and the viewer, as I invite you to follow us on X, TikTok, and YouTube. Till we meet again, be blessed, and thank you.